Hi everyone, it's Andre here from Nari Warren Boot Camps. Just want to go over a quick question I got yesterday from one of my girls, Wendy. Is it possible? Now you always hear people saying that I'm big boned, but is it possible that someone has a heavier skeletal structure than someone else? The short answer is yes, it is very possible. But we'll kind of go into a little bit more detail about bone. I won't get too technical, but we'll kind of build on it from there so you better understand how can be heavier, how one bone can be heavier than another bone. If you close your eyes, so just close your eyes and imagine a bone in your mind's eye, most likely it's going to be what's considered a long bone. So it'll have the two little heads up the top and the bottom, and then there'll be a long shaft down the middle. That's basically known as a long bone. Okay, so in each end of the bone, in those little head sections, what that is known as is spongy bone. Another name for that is trabecular bone, but it is structurally fairly soft and porous. There's a lot of holes in that trabecular bone. From there, going into the shaft of the bone, it's a lot more rigid, and it has a lot more structural dexterity through the shaft there. Basically, if you kind of look at a bone under a microscope, it's made up of these little circular rings. So if you kind of go one big circle, within that big circle there's another smaller circle, and then another smaller circle, and then another smaller circle, and it keeps going until you get to what's known as a central canal. Along these rings, you've got these little dots. Now these little dots are known as osteocytes, that are sitting, they used to be osteoblasts, they've become osteocytes, which is just a bone cell, so osteo being bone, cyte being a cell, a bone cell that is no longer active in performing a particular function. And I'll explain what I mean exactly in a second. So the bone cells, so the osteocytes, are sitting inside a little thing called a lacuna, that is giving the bone its actual strength and dexterity. So that whole unit is known as an osteon. What you have is you've got osteon laid down over osteon laid down over osteon, which kind of builds upon each other and gives you strength. Before a cell becomes an osteocyte, which is relatively dormant, it is active and actively participating in building bone. At this point, it's known as an osteoblast. So you've got osteoblasts. Now, that is building bone, but you also have another cell known as an osteoclast. Osteoclasts break down bone. You might think, why do you want to break down bone? Well, it's very vital that you can break down and remodel bone as it's needed. So as you're growing from a baby, depending on how you stand and how you sit and how you move and how you use your body, it's going to depict how these osteons are being laid down by osteoblasts. Think of, if you've ever had a fracture, if you've ever known anyone to have some kind of bone fracture, they say that the fracture, once it's healed, the bone is actually stronger than it was before the fracture. This leads to why bone can sometimes be heavier, or why one bone can be heavier than another bone. If, for example, you participate in some sort of strength and conditioning program, so you lift weights in the gym, what happens is you get very minute stress fractures occurring in the bone. So these very, very small stress fractures, you don't notice them, but what happens is that these tiny stress fractures, they need repairing and remodeling to compensate for the weight that you're lifting with your strength and conditioning program. As the osteoblasts come in and remodel the bone to cope with the structural necessity that you're kind of putting the bone under, you'll get more of these osteons laying on, and which in turn will increase the bone density, so the density of your bone, how thick it is. Not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe a bad thing if you're focusing too much on the weight that your scales are telling you weigh, which is a very poor way of judging your goals. But basically, it's not a very bad thing. Low bone density, as you might know, osteoporosis and all these other illnesses associated with low density can be helped by a proper strength and conditioning program, and of course, more importantly, a proper nutritional protocol to address those issues there. So that's it with bone. One other thing, and I might not have spoken to you about this already, which is when it comes to bone, milk does not increase the calcium absorption, therefore the bone density of your skeletal structure. Milk does not do that. Milk actually can have, and research shows this, milk can have the opposite effect on your bones. That I'll leave that there, and most likely I'll address that in another video to come. But that's it. So that's the basic structure of bone and how one bone can become heavier than another bone.